John, we have another special guest this week, the recently retired Zack Britton.
Terrific guest. Good job getting him, Joel. Very honest, very bright, very thoughtful fellow. Was very involved with the union and certainly was a Yankee only a couple years ago. And we expect some good, honest opinions, thoughtful opinions from Zack Britton. I think it's going to be an interesting listen.
When he was a free agent last offseason, he decided not to sign and he ultimately ended up retired. We're going to talk about a lot of the people who are going to sign over the next few weeks. Ohtani, Yamamoto, Bellinger. Does Juan Soto get traded? We'll play hit and error at the end. That's if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. The business of the offseason really gets going post-Thanksgiving. That's where we are now. It particularly charges up with the winter meetings, which people start showing up on Sunday and things go in full Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's in Nashville next week. And John, I think the anticipation of the industry, you tell me if I'm wrong, is that someplace between now and the end of the winter meeting, Shohei Ohtani will sign the largest contract in the history of the sport. What do you think? Is that where we're heading? And do you have any thoughts on where we're heading?
Yeah, he's going to sign the largest contract in the history of the sport. That'll say without feeling I'm going on a limb. The timing of it, I'm never good at that. My wish is that he signs fairly quickly because I think a lot of things are held up. I mean, I think this is the most talented player ever, arguably the best player ever. I know I get pushback on that from all the Babe Ruth fans out there or the Barry Bonds fans, but I mean, this is a special, special player. And, obviously many big market teams are involved. It will cost a lot of money and it's holding things up. I don't blame him. He should take his time and do what he wants for himself. But for our sake, I'd like it to go quick.
Yeah, John, those people who argue with them, you just go, okay, he's the third best player ever, but Bonds and Ruth aren't available in this marketplace. So when we think about him, I wonder if you've experienced this at all. You and I are fairly on the phones a lot every day, trying to talk to people. I've been blown away, blown away. I expect the Rangers, certainly the Dodgers, are a team that's been mentioned for about a year now. How many folks think he's going to end up a Red Sox? That the Red Sox have this level of desperation to change the narrative up there. They're cheap. They're disinterested in the baseball team anymore. They certainly, every team could use him, but they could use him. I've been flabbergasted because it was not, if you told me 3 weeks ago, make your list of the top three,
Right.
maybe even the top five, I'm not sure I would have put the Red Sox on it. Dodgers, Cubs, Rangers, Giants, that kind of group. What do you? And again, so little information is getting out about this guy.
Yeah.
So what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing a tremendous job keeping it secret. And Nez Bilello, the main agent, didn't even stay at the main hotel and didn't
I
even,
heard
they
that.
didn't even
Yeah.
admit where he was staying. But we do think he was off site somewhere in Scottsdale. So, we're just reading tea leaves here. I did hear the Red Sox, a couple months ago. Some people just were speculating because he has a New Balance contract and they're in Boston. Also, he does seem to have enjoyed playing there. I know he pitched in the rain there early and avoided pitching at Yankee Stadium to do this. I don't know if that was his choice or the team's or what. We're reading tea leaves here. I mean, if I had 5 teams, I'd probably put the Red Sox on there. I don't know they'd be at the very top. I still think the Dodgers are the favorite. We shall see. The Giants certainly are in there big. I don't think there's any question about that. We believe the Cubs are in there, pitching as well. Texas, possibly. I mean, to me, Texas has the narrative that they need. They're the World Series champ. Do they need another narrative? I'm not sure. But, I mean, you could say that about the Dodgers, right? I mean, they're not going to – how many more fans can they draw? Their TV contract is already the best, So, there are pros and cons for every team. Dodgers, though, for winning consistently, being in Southern Cal where we believe he does like it, that makes sense to me. Still, we shall see. They're not always the biggest payer, or frequently are not. They got good deals on bets on Freeman. Just got one on Jason Hayward. But people still go there, and he's a guy who's not all about money. So that's why I've kind of thought the Dodgers, but I'm not ruling out the Angels either. I think a lot of people have ruled out the Angels, but I think he likes it there. They've let him do what he wanted to do. He proved he's the best player for them. It's comfortable. Southern Cal, I'm not ruling them out. So, again, we're reading tea leaves. We're guessing here. The main thing is we know he's going to get the biggest contract, and we hope it's soon.
Yeah, with what one line that somebody used to me about the Red Sox, they said, "Hey, they get to reverse Ruth, right?" You were mentioning before who's the greatest player ever, the greatest two-way player ever.
Right.
They
Good.
obviously sold Ruth to the Yankees, and they get the modern Ruth. Look, I think if he goes back to the Angels, John, it's a little bit like Trout re-signing with him. Please don't tell me that winning was the most important thing on your docket. The team hasn't won, doesn't seem under this ownership to be able to put together a consistent winner, much less a winner. So I wonder, about that. And with the Dodgers, uh, obviously they want him, but they're going to still need two pitchers besides that because we know for sure he isn't pitching in 2024. And they have either young pitchers or Walker Buehler coming back from Tommy John. So let's transition. We've had some pitchers go in this market already, John. Aaron Nola went back to the Phillies. Sonny Gray just signed. We had Maeda sign. What do you think? And with Gray also we had Lynn and Gibson, right? So they've gotten their three starters. If you think those are the three starters, what do you think of the starting market right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the contracts have been good as you expected. I mean, Nola 172 million. I think he could have gotten a little bit more somewhere else, but he's going to be pretty pleased with that, going back to where he wanted to be. Sonny Gray at 25 million a year. We probably never would have envisioned that based on his New York performance, but he's been good ever since. And he was second in the AL Cy Young. I know it was a big gap between first and second. Still second in the Cy Young is pretty good. It does feel like that mid-market has moved a little bit thanks to St. Louis with Lynn and Gibson and Maeda signing them with Detroit. We have a lot of guys still in that category to fill, whether it be Manaea, Martinez, Ryu, Miley. There's a long list of guys who really could go fairly quickly. I wouldn't be shocked if Eduardo Rodriguez went fairly quickly. Certainly, you could say Gray could be a comp. He is younger, though, so we're expecting more years for Eduardo Rodriguez. I would say that'd be the other big one that could go within the next few days. We'll see. We know that Atlanta hasn't done anything. The Dodgers haven't done anything yet in terms of a big starter. Atlanta did sign the reliever Reynaldo Lopez. I don't see Eduardo Rodriguez probably going to the Dodgers, but of course you never know. But we've identified teams that are looking. Boston, obviously, and everybody's looking at Yamamoto, who we haven't even mentioned. 25-year-old superstar right-hander on that WBC team for Japan. 1.82 lifetime ERA, Yankees, Mets, and everybody else looking at him as well. So, I mean, I think Yamamoto and Ohtani are really the main forces in this market right now. I don't want to say holding up the market, but we're kind of waiting to see where they go. Although I think we're going to see a lot more mid-market plus Eduardo Rodriguez go a little bit before them.
Yeah, I think you're right, John. Is Ohtani the biggest domino and Yamamoto the next domino about because I think they're going to be expensive and teams always got to try to figure out their budgets. How much do we have to spend? How much are we going to spend? And Yamamoto is interesting. You mentioned it, John. Our colleague Mike Vaccaro wrote about it in the New York Post in the Tuesday edition. We don't have a lot of history of the Mets and Yankees wanting the same free agent, especially top of the market. And in this situation, they both want this player. Why not? He's 25. He's won the version of the Japanese Cy Young three times. He's been a champion there. The scouting reports on him are generally terrific. It feels a little bit like Tanaka, but better, right? Tanaka came here at 25, was a guy who handled the pressure great, pitched really well for the Yankees for a long period of time. Again, I'll tell you something. One of the things I'm hearing, I wonder if you're hearing an echo of this, which is so many people think he's going to end up a Met, Yamamoto, because it's simply this is the strength of Steve Cohen, which is that at the end of the day, he can say to a player and a representative, just come to me in the end and tell me what the number is, and then I'll beat it. And when I talk to people, they're like, if this becomes a money play and we don't know what Yamamoto wants, right? We've heard he likes the idea of the Yankees historically. Right. There's certainly other teams in it. But if it's money, We used to think the Yankees would always win in our town. That's not true anymore. The Mets could win in our town.
Certainly, I mean, Steve Cohen has the deepest pockets. He obviously won for Scherzer and Verlander. This is a big piece that everybody in big market is looking at. Even teams like Philadelphia, who's already signed Nola back. Obviously the Dodgers are looking closely at Yamamoto. This is somehow seen as a Mets-Yankee battle, even though there's probably 10 or 12 teams involved. And, maybe it's fair. Maybe those are the two most likely teams. And you could see the Mets, if they're, want to be competitive this year, but really aiming for 2025 and beyond, it makes sense to get someone who's 25 years old. I mean, almost all these free agent pitchers are about 30, if not 30, as they get to be a free agent and have more mileage on their arm. Snell happens not to because, he had some years where fewer innings, but for the most part, they'll have a lot more innings than someone who's 25 years old will have. And it does feel like a Mets-Yankee battle. It really does right now. And it's kind of interesting to say because you heard rumors of West Coast interest, and certainly the Dodgers are in need of starting pitching and as deep pocketed as almost anybody, not as deep pocketed as the Mets. So, I'm not going to count the Giants either. They'd like to come up with a big fish at some point, right? They came close on many, many guys, and they almost had that $350 million for Correa. Obviously, something went wrong with the medical that we know about now. But they tried for Stanton, they tried for Harper, Judge. Not gonna count them. We haven't heard them a ton with Yamamoto. We hear them more with Ohtani, but we got to figure they're trying hard for both.
Yeah, the desperation meter is higher in places outside New York. San Francisco, number one. I think the
Right.
Cubs have a big desperation meter. I think the Red Sox do. By the way, I think the Mariners do. If anybody wakes up there, they just removed money from their payroll by trading Suarez, their third baseman. Are they going to try to do something? It won't be in the pitching realm. They need bats. So why don't we just close this segment quickly, John? We haven't really talked about bats. I don't think a significant bat besides Jason Hayward signed the 1-year contract, has signed in this market. The two names that stand out besides obviously Ohtani are Bellinger and does Soto get traded? They're both players of interest again in New York for the Yankees, maybe Soto for the Mets. But certainly those two players, especially Soto, if he goes on the trade market, are going to have a lot of suitors. What do you think about that pair?
Yeah, I've come around on Soto. I kind of believe at this point he's more likely than not to be traded, even though it is the Padres and it isn't in their DNA. I mean, obviously the death of the beloved, revered owner, Peter Seidler. I don't know if that plays into it at all. He wanted to win at basically all costs. I don't know if they're going to carry on that tradition or not, but you do hear that they'd like to cut payroll. They've got 5 pitchers who are pretty good to great for them. Snell obviously winning the Cy Young, and you've got Hader, who was the top reliever in the league this year, who are free agents now, and they need to replace these guys. And it makes sense that he will be traded. For me, I'd rather see the Yankees go for Bellinger, for the defense, for center field. Because it's not a 1-year thing, and because you're not going to have to give up Spencer Jones, and I don't think they're going to trade Volpe, but Dominguez, you won't have to give anybody up. He's a free agent, so to me, and he's a better fit positional wise. So that makes more sense for me. But I know the Yankees are looking very close. They don't listen to me for some reason. They are looking very closely at Soto. I don't get Soto with the Mets at all. How does that make any sense? If they're playing for 2025 to go out and trade prospects for a 1-year player. And I don't see any way that an extension is signed now. I mean, certainly Scott Boras will talk about an extension if you see the market his way, which is obviously way north of, they didn't even flinch at $440 million. So if you want to give them $550 million or something like that, I mean, they'll talk, I'm sure, but I don't see an extension for Soto. But like you said, Steve Cohen can do what he wants. If he can outbid everybody for Yamamoto, he can agree to that extension for Soto too. So that can be done. But to acquire him as a 1-year player doesn't work for the Mets, I don't think.
Yeah, and my suspicion is Soto will get out into next year's free agent market. At that point, Steve Cohen could do whatever he wants, and that's kind of like the Yankee problem here. Is if you give up, say, 4 prospects for Soto, you're almost compelled to sign them. And we know Scott Boras, pretty good baseball agent. he's going to say, "Oh, the guy across the bridge over there, he's willing to give me five," and the Yankees are going to have to double dip there, right? And the question I keep having with the Yankees, John, is are they set up right this second for success? You could tell me, well, they'd win more games with Soto or Bellinger, though I have a lot of questions about Bellinger as a player. I mean, 12 months ago, he was, not tendered a contract, and he had 2 bad years before that. And I'd worry a little bit if he's some version of Carlos Rodon here, which is like he had a very good walk year, and I'd wonder about the long term of it. But I just look at the Yankee roster, and unless you tell me Volpe's going to be much better, Austin Wells is a real player, Dominguez is a real player, like to me, it's Judge and Cole and pray for rain.
Oh,
I'm not sure
yeah.
that they're really like one great move away from being a significant contender. I think they get
Well,
themselves deeper in the quicksand. They should
well, they
save their
could.
powder for some when they know they could win.
Well, I mean, maybe they're two great moves. I certainly think they were better than 82 and 80. All those injuries they had, obviously losing Judge for a couple months. Rodon, he's got to be better, right? He can't be worse. Cortez has a chance, obviously, to come back and do something special again. Rizzo, obviously, we hear he's doing great now, and they're not. More importantly, it's the Yankee mindset. They're not going to punt on this year. And how many times we say they don't look like they're one player away. That's not going to sway them. They're not going to have another season that they deem a disaster. They're going to try to do their best to put their best foot forward. I will be shocked if they do very little. I mean, I guess we're all surprised that outside entity didn't result in anything, but I'm going to be even more surprised if they don't come up with at least one or two of these big players and go for it this year. They're not going to be a team that's going to punt following an 82 and 80 season with a veteran team.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't recommend punting. I think they're going to have trouble winning on Yamamoto, but if they won on Yamamoto, that's a 25-year-old guy who helps them beyond this season. Again, to Soto, you got to do the combo. To Bellinger, I have questions. I think you can, if you have Yamamoto, it frees up pitching to trade for a bat someplace along the way. These are probably bigger questions, as we get through the winter. But I continue to wonder about their short-term abilities unless these young players, and they have not been good at developing young players for a long time. I'm suddenly supposed to believe that 4 or 5 of them are going to be great simultaneously. I'm not buying it. But we'll deal with that over the long term. We'll talk to an ex-Yankee and an ex-Oriole and somebody who knows the Yankees well and knows Buck Showalter well and knows the game well, and he recently retired. Zack Britton joins us next on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. John and I appreciate Zack Britton joining us on the show. Zack just recently announced his retirement, and it was for quite a career, 12 years, 154 saves, and the 2016 season, the highlight of that is 0.54 ERA, finished 4th in the Cy Young, 11th in MVP. And I wonder, Zack, if the place to start is, why are you retiring? You're 36. John and I covered a couple of your teammates, former teammates, Adam Ottavino and David Robertson, who are even older, who pitched with the Mets, and Robertson with the Marlins last year. You turned 36, I think, in December. Why'd you decide now was the time?
I think the biggest thing is I have 4 young kids. So I knew after the contract with the Yankees, I probably only wanted to play another year or two. My oldest was going to get around that age to where he wasn't able to travel as much or didn't want to. He wanted to be around his friends at home. So he didn't want to make the trips to New York as much. And I just never wanted to be that dad that missed that much. So I had it in my head that I really want to play for a year or two. And then as I was working out for teams, just the contract offers weren't where I wanted them to be, or me and Boris thought to where it was worth it for me to go and be gone and do the things that I knew I could do if I was healthy. I just didn't feel like I was going to get compensated for that. And that was okay because I had already made that decision that I wanted to be home, and another year or two of playing wasn't going to change much for me. I felt like in my career, it wasn't like I was on I wasn't fighting for, I think, Hall of Fame numbers at that stage. So.
One thing I just want to follow up on, and we kept hearing that the Mets had interest. Obviously, you had a long-term relationship with Buck Showalter. I know the Brewers were too. Is anything ever close Did you ever consider anything seriously last year?
Nothing with the Mets. Talking with Billy, it almost felt like they were using the Buck Showalter Dom Chidi relationship, against me a little bit. But it would have been nice. I mean, that was one of the places that I had targeted just because I knew them really well, but nothing was really close there.
How was it? You announced your retirement a year after not playing. How was the adjustment? Were you comfortable with the decision? Are you comfortable not playing baseball? Being around you, you certainly seem to be someone who loved to do it.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. I think the one thing that you miss when you're out of it is the day-to-day experience with your teammates and the fans and that adrenaline rush of going out and performing. And let's face it, that's the only thing I really did my whole life since I was 9 years old was play baseball. And that was, my goal. So last year was tough. I talked with Boris quite a bit about my decision. He said the best thing I could do is take 6 months completely away from the game and see how you feel. And that's kind of what I did. I watched Garrett Cole a few times. When I texted him, he wanted me to watch him pitch, and I did. Or when my son wanted to turn on a game, he wanted to see Judge. We'd watch him play or Machado because he remembers Manny. So we'd watch a few, but for the most part, I really stepped away from the game completely, and it was tough at first, but I really enjoyed the family time. I didn't realize how much I had missed out on my kids' life, their daily life. And so I think that made the decision easier. I felt like I made the right decision at the right time. Sure, I left probably a few good years of playing or, a few more years of, making pretty good money. But I think at the end of the day, 20 years from now, I'm not going to regret the decision that I made.
Joel mentioned 2016, and we look at your career as a major success from our distance. We've had Cameron Maybin and other former players on, and they're a little more critical of their career. How do you view your career now that you can say in retrospect? And is there any regret that you have?
I mean, I really wanted that World Series. I mean, I felt when I signed that contract with the Yankees, myself, and I think Boris, I talked about it. I was like, man, I think I'm going to get at least one World Series ring out of this, So I think for me that, not having that feeling, the individual accolades, they're nice, but from everyone that's won a World Series, there's nothing that can kind of beat that feeling. I spoke with Jordan Montgomery a lot. He won the World Series obviously this year. So just that feeling, that's my biggest regret. But I think my when I was healthy as a reliever, obviously the last 2 years of the Yankees, I wasn't. But when I was healthy, I felt like I was one of the best at my position, the years that I was healthy. So I felt like as a reliever, I really came into my own. I'm really happy with that bulk of work. If you separate the starter numbers and you look at the reliever numbers, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to kind of find anybody that was better. I was right up there with anybody that played in that when I was closing or relieving. Definitely not as a starter, but as the reliever, I was very happy with the body of work as a reliever.
Zach, you mentioned thinking you were going to win a World Series with the Yankees. You were quoted last week essentially saying they lost some of their aura, essentially, right? Like this feeling of that they were unbeatable at home, etc. Why don't you sum it up first? What do you didn't win? Why didn't the team win?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, as you guys know, when you follow a team, there's sometimes it's a coin flip, right? One guy stays healthy and you can win the whole thing. So it's not necessarily one thing. But the one thing I did notice, when I got traded to the Yankees, we had success in Baltimore, but not that year. We were doing that fire sale where we traded everybody basically. And going to New York, it was really exciting. I knew I wasn't going to close necessarily with Chapman there. I was going to split some time there, but that was okay because it was like, man, this is the Yankees. And when you grow up, that's the kind of the pinnacle of sports, right? Is in baseball terms, at least, is playing for the Yankees. You're going to win. And, when I got to we obviously went to the playoffs right away, but then when I re-signed, I felt like we were always playing catch up to somebody else. And I don't really know why that was, because I was like, man, this is the Yankees. Like, we should be just concerned about, building the best team and going out and playing baseball with the best players. But I always felt like we were trying to catch, like the Rays, which is so weird because of how they build their teams, right? You know, they're going to be budget conscious and they're going to really dive into the analytics and try to build just kind of like a scrappy team, which we didn't necessarily need to do that in New York. But I think with my quotes, I had talked to a lot of people around the game, just friendships that I had. And when they came into Yankee Stadium, you know, that was one of the first things I thought. It wasn't the same place. It wasn't as intimidating. They felt like our teams were like more one-dimensional than before. And what I said to Brittany was, when I was coming up with the Orioles, before we got good, you know, you didn't want to go to New York. When I was a young starter, you didn't want to face that lineup because it was a tough lineup. You know, the guys at the top of the lineup, whether it was Jeter or, you know, Ichiro, obviously, you know, he might have been at the back end of his career, but they still, you know, could beat you multiple ways. And there's nothing harder as a pitcher when you know the offense. You know, they can hit a home run, they can walk, they can get a couple base hits, they'll move guys around. Makes it much harder to navigate a lineup. And I kind of felt like we had lost that, and other people had told me we had lost that. And that's where those quotes had come from with Brittany.
You know, Joe mentioned your career year. I think you gave up 4 runs in that year, or something like that. It was just an amazing season, and I didn't have a vote, so I'm not going to apologize, but I would have voted for you. Didn't have a vote that year. I think Porcello may have won, and that was the year I think Justin Verlander finished second. You were fourth. And, you know, Justin, we know that his wife came out and said that, you know, her husband should have won. Your wife is a brilliant lawyer, from what I hear. She didn't come out and say anything. But what did you think? I mean, to me, you had an all-time season. So I thought their seasons were excellent, but we'd seen them before. So I thought you should win. Did you have any thoughts on that?
You know, I think in the moment, I was just so focused on the season. And then afterwards, I felt like I was at least going to be in like the top 3, and I didn't even get that. And I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously I got the reliever of the year, and that's the award designated for, you know, having, you know, a good reliever season. So I was happy with that. With the Cy Young, I just felt like it was going to be that old time debate, right? Do you throw enough innings? Are you making enough of an impact? Are you out impacting the starter, right? I guess would be how you look at it. And that's tough as a guy that's been a starter. I mean, is 200 innings more valuable than 65? I think it's all relative, right? You know, depending on your game situation. Now, if you're getting save opportunities, they're all 3-run games. I don't necessarily think that's as impactful as maybe having a lot of 1-run saves. I think you got to look at it a little deeper than that. But I think Porcello won 20 wins. I don't think we value wins as much as we used to. But 20 wins is still a lot. So I'm not disappointed in the Cy Young. How can you be disappointed in the fact that I was a reliever and even got a chance to you know, to be nominated for one? I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned Brittany a few times. We should give her some props here. Brittany Giroli from The Athletic wrote the original story when you retired that included the stuff about the Yankees. And if I could just because the Yankees have been, you mentioned it, they're always the pinnacle. They're such big news all the time. And their 2 most forward-facing executives have been under fire this offseason, Aaron Boone and Buck Showalter. I'm sorry, Aaron Boone and Brian Cashman. You played for those guys. I wonder if you could tell us, do you think Aaron Boone is a good manager? Do you think Brian Cashman's a good general manager?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And some of the best advice I got when I went to New York, I'm not going to name the player, but was that the Yankee fan base expects an all-star at every position every day, right? And it's true, and rightfully so. And that's not just for the players on the field, right? That's your manager, that's your general manager, that's your owner or whatnot. So when you have a season, or when you haven't won a World Series in a while, I know the fan base there gets restless. And they're going to critique everybody. I think Brian Cashman, he's the longest tenured GM in the game. He's a great baseball guy. I'm not so sure you're going to find a better baseball guy, a guy that's experienced multiple ways to win championships. Aaron Boone, the same way. I mean, you look at the baseball family, him as a player. I mean, you're not going to really find a better baseball resume. Boone does a great job with the players. Players love playing for him. Boone's the right guy for New York. He handles the media well, I think. He communicates with players well. He's a good manager for the player now that's coming up, right? Because it's a new type of player. And with Cashman, he communicated great with me. I think sometimes, and this happened to me personally, when analytics comes into play. Like, right, we get our iPad. You can go down the rabbit hole of analytics and you can kind of find anything to justify anything, right? Like the numbers, you can kind of skew them anyway to paint the picture you want to paint. And I think with Brian, it might be just, maybe needed to blend the two a little bit more. I'm not so sure because I'm not in the front office. I only know what I saw as a player and what I was exposed to. And I'm not exposed to what's happening behind closed doors in the front office. So I don't really know, what their discussions are going on. I just know as a player there, a lot of times in the clubhouse, I felt like there was this disconnect between some of the things that we were presented with and what we were seeing on the field as players. And sometimes that creates, that rift, which is not what you want. You want a very, from a clubhouse culture standpoint, you want everything to mesh well together, whether it be the communication from the front office to the play on the field. And I felt that sometimes the two just weren't connecting well. What the players were saying, and we're like, hey, we should be doing this, and yet this has been working well. And then sometimes the way that was implemented through the data didn't line up. And I don't think I'm the only player that feels that way. But I don't think it's Brian Cashman or Aaron Boone. I think it's an organizational thing because, like I said, Brian's won in the game through all these different transitions of whether it be the shift or how data is interpreted and applied to, signing free agents or trading for players or, building out your roster. So I think he's the right guy. He's a great baseball guy. I just think sometimes we got to step back. Me as a player, I did it too, and figure out what the data is telling me and then what should I be applying and what maybe I shouldn't be applying. I don't know if that's a clear answer, but that's
very interesting. This is a tougher question now. Is there any thoughts on how to resolve any of that issue? That's probably they're probably not unique with that issue, but
yeah, I don't think they're unique at all.
Different.
No, a lot of guys are going to point to, obviously the Rangers winning a World Series, Chris Young being a former player, but understanding like the analytics, bringing in some of those guys. They win a World Series, but I think there's multiple ways to do it. I saw Chris Getz got hired as the White Sox. So there's some former players. I feel like teams are more open now to bringing some of these guys back. It's a specific guy. You're not just talking about anybody that played. Oh yeah, let's just hire him. Right. But I think somebody that can understand that analytics is important. It's just about understanding the human dynamic of playing the game and how can you actually apply to the guys playing on the field. And I think that's where the disconnect is. And I think some teams have identified that is an issue. And I know guys that have played with the Rays have said that they do a very good job of addressing some of the analytics with the players, picking and choosing what players should know and what should stay in the front office.
Zach, I'm wondering, and again, this is a difficult thing because, as you mentioned, you don't know exactly what's going on, wheeling and dealing upstairs. You're not there. But is it the job of the veteran player, when you were there, someone like Garrett Cole now, Aaron Judge, to say, guys, there is a disconnect here? Because as recently as a couple of weeks ago at the GM meetings, Brian Cashman was still suggesting that there's some 50-50 split, that the analytics don't win all the time, that this is a misperception. But then I know we talk to people like you, I talk to players in the clubhouse, and it's not a misperception, right? There is discontent. There is some feeling that, to your point, the numbers could be justified in any way. See, if you would have thrown a slider, you would have gotten the guy out. Would I? My slider against this hitter? So I just wonder always, is it, where does the veteran player fall into this to be able to either march upstairs, owner, GM, manager, hey, this isn't working here. We need a more human touch and a more eyeball. What's working on this date, on this Tuesday night?
Right. I think one of your points is it's not a Yankee issue, right? Let's face it. There's always been a disconnect from the player to probably the front office. There's always been that disconnect between, hey, I'm playing, you've never played, right? You're just looking at the computer, which isn't really the right way to look at it, right? Because that just causes the struggle that no one's ever going to win. As a veteran player, there's been multiple instances when I was in New York, and this is a New York thing for me because with the Orioles we didn't have any analytics when I was there. Okay, so the Yankees are my first time being exposed to any of it. But I know that there was multiple instances with veteran players that had said, "Hey, like this isn't working. Like why am I or why are we the only people that see that it's not working? Like can we adjust? As players, you make the adjustment when it's not working, right?" And I think there was definitely some veteran players who are like, "Hey, this hasn't been working. Like, can we like make an adjustment instead of doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result?" But I'll give you like a great example. I remember, when Gio Urshela was with us, we had some injuries. Gio kind of came up, and no one really expected much of him, right? But he played amazing defense. Amazing defense. I mean, he saved so many runs and just like his energy playing. And then offensively, he kind of came alive, right? But he maybe didn't do the things that like you would, he didn't hit a ton of home runs, right? He wasn't necessarily that guy, but he played great defense. He was a steady presence. But the team dynamic when he was on the field kind of changed. I mean, you could just feel it. Like, man, this guy's going to make great plays for you. Or he's going to have a good at bat and maybe get a single. And, nothing flashy. But there was a dynamic where I felt like maybe we played our best baseball when some of those type of players came up. The Mike Tauchmans for a moment, or the Gio Urshela. Like we played some really good baseball in those months when we had kind of this scrappy team. Gardy was playing a little bit more. Not saying that's the way to go, but there's sometimes where maybe the analytics isn't going to say that's the best guy, to put in the lineup. And I know it's not going to say it, but the team just flows better. If that makes sense. As you guys are in the clubhouse, you can tell. I mean, I'm sure you guys could tell in those moments. I think they called them the B squad bombers at the time, right? But there was this thing about the clubhouse energy was good. The play on the field wasn't necessarily, we're not hitting home runs a ton, but we're making great plays on defense. We're moving guys over. There's just a different energy to the team. And those are the things that you can't quantify with analytics. Because it's not numbers based. It's human based, and the sport is still human based. Every day when I go to the field, I don't feel the same way, but and if I don't have my best sinker, I'm not going to put those numbers up that maybe the computer would project me to put up, right? So I think there's just that disconnect. I understand the value of all of it, and I think some of these guys that are playing that are getting into significant roles in the front office, I think they understand that as well.
Going back to Baltimore, where there apparently were no analytics, we all think Buck Showalter's a brilliant baseball guy. Obviously, there was that one time in the playoffs, I believe it was against Toronto. I think it was an elimination game where he kind of was saving you, I think. I don't know. Did you? We never quite got the explanation. Did you get an explanation of what happened there? Because he certainly got a lot of criticism for that one move that you weren't used. And you were clearly the best reliever, not only on the team, but maybe even in the game at that moment.
Yeah, we never really talked about it in depth. I think over the years, when I think about it, the one thing about Buck, as you guys know, I always felt he was overly prepared. And I just don't think he thought that was the situation, whether, we weren't really scoring. Liriano was in for the Blue Jays at the time, throwing really well. And I just thought he was saving me for, a safe situation, or at least an opportunity where he felt like, maybe it was going to be like a 2-inning save and he could deploy me. I don't think there was anybody left after Ubaldo when it was me, and I'm not so sure if there's anybody. We had kind of used the bullpen pretty significantly that game. But no, I've never really got an answer to it. But the one thing about Buck is he always put me in positions to be successful. So maybe he didn't feel like that was the situation. I'm not so sure, but he didn't lose my respect. I just think the games that happened after ours, with how Andrew Miller threw with the Indians and things like that, I think it got magnified because teams started deploying their relievers early. But that's all in hindsight. It's tough when you're in the moment, and he made that decision, and he had to live with it, obviously, with the backlash. But I'm not so sure. I was ready to go. I just don't think he felt like that was the best, best situation for me. Baldo had thrown well, and it just didn't work out.
my final question for you. Anybody who's been listening knows, can tell you're a very thoughtful, very bright fellow. You're obviously very active in the union. So I was wondering what your plans are now that you are free, not just a free agent, but free to do whatever you want to do. What are you looking at? You would like to be in the front office? Would you like to be an agent, work for the union? And also on a little bit less serious note, I know that during the middle of your career, you changed your spelling from an H to a K. Was that just for the strikeout while you were pitching, or is that actually how you spell your name?
Well, the name change was definitely more of a legal thing for my wife. She had found my birth certificate and saw that it was a K, and was just,
Okay.
why are you spelling it with an H? And I was like, I don't know. That's just how I was always spelling it. So that was more of a legal thing for my wife. Okay. I think my focus right now is going to be spending time with my kids. But if I really think about it in the future, and the one thing, if I'm going to get back into the game, I always have had this interest in wanting to help build a team. Not saying that I want to be a GM, right? Be a GM at all, but I definitely want to at least help somebody maybe in the GM role with my perspective, because I think it's valuable when there's players that get invested in both sides. I'm not old school baseball. I'm not 100% analytics. I just think I got a good feel for the players nowadays, and obviously having done some of the things with the union and communicating with all different types of players. The stuff that I had to do with the Yankees, whether it was during COVID or not, I felt like I evolved a lot. But then the Yankees exposing me to analytics, I feel like I learned a lot. I would always talk to those guys. I was very interested in the information. And I think those are good people behind the scenes. They don't get a lot of credit when things go the team's way and the team's doing well, but they definitely get a lot of criticism when the team struggles. So I know those guys in the Yankees front office really well, and they're good people, and they want to win as much as the players on the field. But I think I bring that dynamic, whether that be to a front office at some stage, where some other players maybe don't have any interest in doing that.
Zach, just to wrap up, you mentioned that you try to stay away from the game a lot last year, be with your family, but you also mentioned here that you have a big picture thing that maybe you want to be involved in the game, big picture, long term. Will you do anything this year? Will you try to reach out to people and say, hey, I'm around, let me walk through your minor league system, or I'd come for a meeting? What do you want to do in baseball immediately, maybe not to lose a feel for it, a hand in the game?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you definitely don't want to be away from it too long, because the game evolves. I'm not, I kind of will wait. I'm going to talk with, I still communicate with Boris a lot. We have a really good relationship, and kind of pick his brain on maybe the best way. If that's, if I want to get back in the front office, what's the best way to, approach teams, or, do I wait, for somebody to reach out? So I'll talk with him. But as you say, yeah, maybe just assisting for a little bit. Like I said, I don't want to coach. My goal had always been to help build a team. I think that makes a lot of sense for, the skill set that I want to bring to an organization. So I'm not so sure what I'm going to do right now, whether it's reaching out for teams or seeing if somebody has interest in seeing what I have to say. I'm not so sure, but I do think staying in the game in some capacities is important, because, whether it be rule changes or, just the play on the field, things evolve very quickly in the game, more so than people think. So I definitely want to stay involved in some capacity.
Zach, you mentioned your relationship with Boris quite a bit here. If you'd like to break news on here and tell us where Bellinger, Montgomery, and Snell are going, we're happy. It's just us three. Nobody else will know it if you'd like.
Well, as you guys know, Scott, it's probably going to be whoever gives them the most money, but which is okay. He never gives me. He'll never spill the beans to me. I don't care. That's the stuff he keeps close to the vest. But probably whoever gives them the most money.
Well, Zach, I say this often. I don't like to talk for John, but I do it here, saying we love covering you. You're one of the guys always available, always honest, never cliched. And I think you showed that again. Thanks so much for joining us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. And great career and great luck with your retirement.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
We thank Zack Britton for joining us on the show. John, hit or error?
I'm going to give a hit to the St. Louis Cardinals. I know they're getting some criticism for not going out and getting one of the biggest pitchers out there, but they got a pretty good one. Second to Cy Young in Sonny Gray. I like that move. He'll be good in St. Louis. He's been good everywhere but New York. So And they added to depth, obviously, with Gibson, who I think is solid. And Lynn, we'll see, obviously give up more than 40 home runs last year, but he does answer the bell, which is important. And I think their offense is actually very, very good. I don't know what happened at the end of last year. Obviously, they did not play up to their standard. Even their two superstars didn't. But I think they're going to be much better this year. And I think they have improved themselves.
Yeah, I think they have other moves to do. They still have money to spend. They have a bunch of extra bats to go out and make a trade or two. And I actually think Sonny Gray is a very, very good major league pitcher who just wasn't good in New York for whatever reason that was. But I don't know that I love Lynn and Gibson, but I do think Sonny Gray will be a good pitcher for a few more years. John, I'm going to give a hit to the two World Series participants. The Rangers and Diamondbacks, it came out what they did with their share money. I believe the Rangers did 64 shares. I think the Diamondbacks did 71. Our friend, colleague, and someone who was on this show, Ken Rosenthal, wrote a column in The Athletic about what the Diamondbacks did with their distribution. Evan Longoria was quoted throughout. And I love when the teams recognize that this is a way to change, like 300,000 for them or $400,000 for some of the veteran players. It's not as much as obviously, but they recognize a full share for a clubhouse attendant, for a traveling secretary, for a food attendant, for their nutritionist. Right. That's life-changing money for people who have traveled the whole way with the team. And more, and I'll say this, I always like to point out the NBA and your neck of the woods, old neck of the woods, Milwaukee. Dame Lillard pointed out that he'd like to win this in-season tournament for the Bucks because the money is so valuable to the guy who's the two-way player, to the fourth coach on the team, the fifth coach on the team. And when ball players see that the world bigger than themselves, I think it reflects well on the sport. And I think how the Rangers and the Diamondbacks handled their shares reflected well on the leadership of those two organizations player-wise.
Yeah, I mean, Gold Star, certainly the Rangers and the Diamondbacks, that was a great thing to do. Certainly, even if it's not a full share, even if it's not the 500,000 and the 300,000, even if it's a half share or a third share or a quarter share or whatever, I mean, getting an extra $100,000, that's great. That's terrific certainly for people making 100,000 or making 50,000 or whatever. So I give them a lot of credit for that. That was a great thing to do.
Yeah, and those were the champions last year. We're going to continue to watch who's building towards a championship in 2024. John and I will be at the winter meetings in Nashville next week. We'll be doing the show from there. The show is a podcast from the New York Post. Thanks as always, Jake Brown, Andrew Hartz, our producers, for helping us do this show. It doesn't get done without them. Don't forget, the show drops on the Yes app about Wednesday at noon each week. Subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Please give us a 5-star rating. It does help the show. And John, I'll see you in Nashville. Stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman.